The following stories have been submitted to me directly. Story 1. As a forensic pathologist, meeting with corpses was in my daily routine. I was rarely surprised by what I saw. Being able to compartmentalize is practically a requirement for the job, but that didn't mean I was never surprised. One evening, John, my friend and colleague, was on duty with me when he received an urgent call from home. His mother had recently fallen ill, and she had taken a turn for the worse. When he asked if I could manage on my own, of course I said yes. Shortly after John left, I received a call from the lab's research team. They had found a corpse in the forest, without a drop of blood to be found, and no evidence of what had happened. When the body was brought back to the lab, we ran all of our normal tests, checking for a heart attack or any sign of disease. When all the tests came back, how difficult would it be to determine the cause of death? After the tests were run, I began the autopsy. On the corpse's neck there was a large bite. Initially the observation was noted, but pushed aside. The bite wasn't deep enough or near any major arteries to have likely caused this man's death. Setting my assumptions aside, I took a picture and scanned it into our system. We had a program that could compare different bite marks and match them up to the most likely animals. Thank God for technology advancement. You can imagine my skepticism when the system came back with a 98% match to that of a goat. In all my years, I had never seen someone bitten by a goat. While I still found it highly unlikely the goat bite caused this man's death, I had to consider that maybe the goat was ill or had been poisoned, thus transferring whatever it had to the man. It sounds strange, sure, but it still wasn't the strangest thing I've ever seen. Examining the wound further, I noticed there was an area in the middle that was a darker shade of bluish-purple. Reading over the initial report again, I noticed that it was noted the bite had broken several blood vessels, likely causing the man to bleed out. Though rare, this type of injury isn't unheard of. I finished my examination and, having found no other peculiar signs, accepted that this must have been the cause of death, and I could go home for the night. As I packed up my things and made my way to the door, I felt this pull inside of me. While I was beyond tired, this nagging question in my head kept asking, is it really possible that a goat bite caused that much damage to the blood vessels? In all my years, I had never seen anything like it. While I knew I should just accept things as they were, the scientist in me yearned for more information. I should have gone home to get some much-needed rest, but curiosity got the better of me. Setting my bag down, I approached the man again to have another look. Something inside me told me there was no conceivable way that a goat could have caused this man's death. So, I decided to take a DNA swab of the bite in order to determine where the cells originated from. I have to admit that I was surprised to see that the system registered the cells as human. Well, now this is quite the anomaly, I said to myself. Was the system wrong? Was I so tired that my eyes were deceiving me, or my brain showing me what I wanted to believe? There was no way a human's bite would resemble that of a goat. The mouth structure is quite different between the two. Though, I suppose it would be possible to mimic a goat bite if you had a set of dentures. If you put enough power behind the bite, you could burst the blood vessels and cause damage. I knew I wasn't going to gain anything further by depriving myself of a good night's sleep. At that, I picked up my things and left. I was resigned to the fact that there likely wasn't another explanation for what had happened to that man. As much as I hated to admit it, this may be a case that gets closed without any real answers. At least not the answers I was looking for. Once home, I went straight to my room, changed into my PJs, and fell into bed, falling asleep almost immediately. But then, I was running as fast as I could. I couldn't tell what I was running away from, but I knew I was scared. As I turned to see who was chasing me, I noticed a person with a mask on. If I had to guess, it was a man due to its height and build. As I turned back around, I suddenly crashed into something solid. Looking up, I saw a goat, leaning over me. In my shock, I failed to notice that the person chasing me was laughing, cackling really, with saliva dripping from his mouth. I was so focused on the goat leaning over me that I didn't see the man that had been chasing me show up on my other side. When I turned, I noticed the man had taken his mask off, displaying the head of a goat. Immediately, I was awake, my alarm going off loudly next to me. I followed my usual morning routine, grabbing my keys and bag a half-hour later and heading out the door. On my way to work, I couldn't stop thinking about the dream, how real it felt, and how odd it was to see a man with the head of a goat. I'm not usually one to read into dreams and interpret them as signs, but something about this dream told me that there was more to this case than I first thought. I resolved to keep researching. Deep down, I knew that my initial findings barely scraped the surface in determining what happened to this man. I was surprised to find John at work the next morning. After checking that things were all right at home, I had decided to share my findings with John and tell him about my dream to see if he could shed any light on its meaning. Though it's true I usually work better alone, John is the one person I truly enjoy working with. We have this easy routine, and we challenge each other when necessary, but never at the expense of the other. John was just as intrigued as I was about the man still lying on our examination table, and even more intrigued about the dream I had had just after. But, until we get to the bottom of what really happened, I think we should just keep this to ourselves, he had said. I couldn't have agreed more. We decided we would go to the crime scene that evening. We felt it better to return under the cover of darkness, when the man was attacked. John felt it might give us a better idea of his state of mind before and during the attack. So, as we inspected the site that night, we heard this clamorous sound up ahead. The ground began to tremble, as if a large animal was heading our way. We knew it was far too dark to run, and since we didn't know what we were yet facing, we thought it best to shrink back into the shadow of the trees. When the thing got close enough for us to discern what it was, we were speechless. Whatever was coming near to us, it was at least 10 feet tall, with large horns protruding from its head. I thought this must be a joke. Someone dressed up with a mask on and stilts, something to make them look larger than life. But when the thing was within mere steps of where John and I were hidden, the moonlight shone on its face. What confronted me was surely something out of my dreams. Wait, was I dreaming again? Had I fallen asleep and not realized it? I felt as though I were back in my dream from the night before, because the thing standing in front of me was a man, but with the head of a goat. John shook my shoulder, bringing me back to reality. It was then that I realized I had never left my reality. What I saw in front of me was real, and John was seeing him too. I could tell by the pleading look in John's eyes that he wanted to leave right away, but I was frozen to the spot, rooted there by some strange fascination, and also scared to make a move, possibly becoming the next meal for this beast. After a few minutes, the beast must have heard something in the distance, because it reared its head in the other direction and took off as quickly as it had come. Once we knew the coast was clear, we ran to the car. Silence permeated the car as we made our way back to the lab. Before I continue to the next story, I just want to say thank you for choosing to watch this video, and I hope you're enjoying my narration. If you are, please go ahead and hit the like button, and if you don't already, subscribe to my channel. It really helps me to grow. Story 2. Some stories are tragedies. Some stories start with tragedy. Since I made it out alive, I would not say my story is a tragedy. Horror? Yes, absolutely. This experience, I think, will haunt me for the rest of my days. But it's not a tragedy. The tragedy happened right at the beginning. My father's death. That's how my story starts. It was something absolutely heartbreaking and that would change me forever, but I knew there were things I had to be thankful for. My father wasn't very old, but he lived a good and happy life. He wasn't in a lot of pain when he died, and I got to spend a lot of time and say goodbye before it happened. Still, it was the worst thing that happened to me. I was very close to my father, and the loss haunted me. I was deep in my pain and my grief and seeing no way out. Looking for some sort of comfort, I dove deep in my father's history, in his life, in everything he left behind. He was born in the city of Bowie in Maryland. When he married my mother, they moved to Baltimore, where I was born. When I grew up and went away for college, my grandparents died, and my father moved back to his charming childhood home, where he lived through his divorce, retirement, and eventually, where he died. So, obviously, that's where I found myself when the darkness of my grief refused to let me go on with my life. Studying my father's home, I was surprised to learn new things about him. We were close, but I suppose you never really fully know another person, no matter how much you love each other. For example, my parents raised me without giving too much importance to religion. I grew up thinking that was the norm and thinking, too, that my parents felt the same way. However, my father's home revealed the truth of his faith. Not something scandalous or dark. He was just a very Catholic man. The more I lived in that house, the more I found out about how strictly religious he was in the privacy of his home. Crucifixes and Bibles were scattered around the place. This was odd, not only for how he seemed to have kept it a secret, but because one thing my father never kept a secret was his fascination with the supernatural. My dad was, I guess, you could almost call him a big fan of everything related to supernatural creatures, legendary monsters, ghosts, and everything in between. I knew he often talked about it, read every news article, loved the movies, hated the rest. He took it all very seriously. But here's the thing. That house wasn't just the place where he died. It was his childhood home, and it showed me more secrets than I knew what to do with. Being a fan of scary folk stories and a teenager in the city of Bowie in the 70s, my father obviously had a favourite creature, the Goatman. In that old house, I found 2 boxes filled to the brim with things about the Goatman. I believe my dad had a copy of every article where the creature was ever mentioned, including 2 notebooks where he made his own notes. I couldn't finish reading either of them. Something too emotional about holding in my hands something he had taken so much time to create. So, I started learning a little too much about the Goatman. It started with the classic Maryland legend, the infamous experiment with goats that went wrong at the Beltsville Research Agricultural Center, delivering a half-scientist, half-goat monster. I peeked into the legends that sparked up in the rest of the country, including the farmer in Texas that was murdered, but his body disappeared to become the legend that would haunt that bridge. But then I started reading the smaller rumors, all the little encounters, studying the details of every single blurry picture of the monster. I soon became obsessed, thinking about it day and night, waking up at 3 a.m, sweating and screaming after having nightmare after nightmare of the deformed body, the axe, the rams dripping with blood. That could have been it. That could have been the end of the story. In fact, it should have been. I should have packed up the pictures, maybe taken my father's favourite old jacket, and I should have moved on with my life. Sold the house, forgotten about the city of Bowie, about Fletchertown Road, and about the Goatman. Now, I don't know if it was my father's spirit who convinced me to stay. He believed in that sort of thing. I didn't. Maybe I had just thought so much about the Goatman that I made him real in my mind. Maybe I was already haunted. Maybe he was the thing to get me to stay. I know my dad believed in it. Maybe I was starting to believe too. I suspected maybe his faith was the one reason he never managed to witness the monster he was so obsessed with. But I lacked that faith. What did I have to protect me? The point is, I extended my stay in Bowie, and I started visiting the infamous Crybaby Bridge. That was the #1 spot for Goatman encounters and sightings. At first, I went in the daylight taking pictures, happy to pretend I was just a curious tourist. Soon enough, I was spending my afternoons by the side of the road, reading over and over again all the articles available about the Goatman. When the sun started to go down, the cars and passers-by were less and less, and I was running out of light to read, things started to turn uncomfortable. There was too much silence at times, and then I felt like the woods behind me were alive and angry. There were footsteps of rustling leaves, groups of birds fleeing the trees. My palms would start to sweat, and my heart would be faster, and if I closed my eyes, I was almost sure I wasn't alone. Thing was, my father or the Goatman, I was no longer sure what I was hoping to find when I opened my eyes. Eventually, I ran out of excuses to pretend I wasn't looking for something supernatural to come at me. I would go to the damned bridge late at night and sometimes stay until the mornings. I would walk around the woods, my heart in my throat, and no weapon to defend myself. I felt like I was losing my mind, but at the moment I was fine with it. More than once, I crossed paths with the locals. Sometimes I even accidentally scared them, and they all warned me to stay away. When I looked into their eyes, I didn't see annoyance at a random tourist stirring up trouble. I saw actual, genuine, primal fear in their eyes. I would have ignored any and every warning. I was growing a stranger to my self-preservation instinct. If there was no Goatman, I was starting to fear I would become it. But then I was found. Not by my father's ghost, not by this strange creature, but by the one logical weakness we all have. My own mother. She had left Bowie after she divorced my father, but she still lived in the county, and apparently one of the few people I had run in with had been her friend and recognized me as her son. So, of course, my mother came to pick up her son who was going crazy. I tried to convince her I was perfectly sane, but it was a difficult argument to uphold when she found me by myself wandering Fletchertown Road at night and refusing to get in the car with her. My mother wrapped her arms around me and held me tightly. I had always been closest to my father, but I had to admit her embrace was the most comforting thing I had experienced in a while. She told me she loved me, and she understood my grief. She told me that when I was ready to give up this madman's quest, she would be there to pick me up. Then, she let me go. Afterward, I was surprised to feel better. My head was considerably clearer than it had been since I arrived at this cursed town. However, I was also feeling nauseous. It took me a while to figure out that the source of my discomfort was an awful, disgusting, rotten smell. I felt my adrenaline pick up. That was commonly referred to as a sign of the Goatman's presence. Just when I wasn't so sure I wanted to meet him after all. I kept walking discreetly, trying to find my way back to the road. That's when it happened. I slipped on something and fell to the ground. The smell was grotesque. I looked around until I found the source. I believe it was a dead fox, headless. I had slipped on the animal's blood. There was a terrified scream stuck in my throat. I had goosebumps everywhere. And then I heard it. The hooves. Slow, firm, heavy, crushing the grass and the fallen leaves. So close by. At the time, I thought I'd faint, but I had never wanted to live so much and had never felt as much fear as I did at that moment. I tried not to move, not to make any noise, but I desperately looked around me. I wanted to say I was looking for help, but I know part of me was still a curious fool. And I got what I wanted. I saw it. I saw him. Close enough to recognize in the dark. Far away enough to avoid giving me a heart attack, even before the monster attacked. I was lying on the ground, so the first thing I saw were the hooves, the goat legs, a pair, not 4 legs of a common goat, and they were impossibly large. Not a goat at all. Maybe something closer to a horse, but definitely not natural. Slowly my eyes started to move up, looking at those horrendous legs, and finally I was starting to see the end of them. The start of something nightmarish, something abnormal, something disgusting that should be impossible. The start of a human body. I closed my eyes and tensed my entire body and wished with my heart that my death would be quick. I heard footsteps again, but they were moving away from me. I was feeling nauseous, lightheaded, but conscious enough to understand that this could be my only chance of survival. I took a deep breath, and with every bit of strength my body was capable of, and then some more, I jumped to my feet and started running as fast as I could, stumbling through the woods, scratching my face and arms with the tree's branches. The groans and goat noises that I heard behind me, I can still hear them play in the back of my head, and they make me shake in fear as much as I did that day. When I finally made it to the main road, I kept running until I crashed against a car parked on the side of the road. It was my mum, who had decided to stay back in case I needed her. I got in the back seat and laid down and started to cry as she drove away from that place, away from Bowie altogether, in the middle of the night. She never asked me what I saw. I think she knew the answer. Story 3. I'm going to share the story of a friend of mine, of a terrifying creature. Not to scare you, but to inform you about my friend's personal experience of encountering that creature. My mum and dad used to scare me in my childhood and my teenage years by telling me about the Goatman, but I never took it seriously. I've always considered myself a skeptic. Before sharing the story of my friend's encounter, I want to shed some light on this creature. The Goatman is a half-man and half-animal creature. You can call it a monster. No one exactly knows where he came from. Although the origins of the Goatman are unknown, the most popular story about his existence is that there was a scientist who was working at Beltsville Agricultural Research Center and doing various experiments on goats. One of his experiences went wrong, and he mutated into a goat-human hybrid and turned into an insane creature named Goatman. He became uncontrollable and began to attack cars and people with an axe near the back roads of Beltsville, Maryland. Seems a bit fantastical to me, almost like a villain from a comic book. I'm not sure about the facts of his existence, but this is the only story I found about the origins of this creature. Some people believe he is a mere hermit, seen wandering alone at night along Fletchertown Road. This is my friend George's story about his encounter with the Goatman, as told in his own words. From my teenage years, I was curious about unusual and mysterious creatures and often researched them in my free time. Whenever I travel to a place where a forest or any other place with a scary look appears, I expect a monster would cross my path. At the moment, I am 25 years old and doing my dream job at an international company. I'm a HR manager, and I love my job. Due to my passion for the work, I usually stay at the office even after working hours, sometimes till night, and return home between 9 to 10 p.m. There was a dense forest outside of my office, and in winters, 9 p.m. looks like midnight. This was a cold night in December 2018. I was returning home around 10, and suddenly my car's coolant warning light became illuminated on my dashboard. I panicked because it was a clear sign that my car's engine was overheating. I was feeling pretty low that day and was not in the mood for handling an unusual situation. But unfortunately, it happened, and I had to fix it as soon as possible, as it was getting late. I was stuck halfway to my house with an overheated engine. About 10 or 15 footsteps away from where I was that forest. I began to hear noises in the forest, but I figured they were just animals or insects. I'm usually not that scared of such things, but as I said, that day I wasn't feeling that great, and my anxiety was getting the better of me. My coolant level was low. I had a warning, but I was so caught up with some work that I completely forgot to top it up. Not really knowing what I was doing, I just grabbed some bottles of water from the car and used that to top it up. I was outside of the car, with my head under the hood, and I heard a scream behind me. It was not very near, but it was loud. I turned around to see what it was. It was a man with a half-human and half-goat-like body. His lower body and legs were not covered with any clothes. The legs were hairy and shaped like goat's legs. His upper body was kind of human-shaped. He had horns like a goat's horns growing out of his head. Ears were also strange, pointed up like an animal's ears. He looked like a mythological satyr. His facial features were not so clear because it was night. He was sitting in a fallen tree and eating something. It looked like it could have been a dog. I heard that goatmen do eat dogs. I was staring at him without blinking, and in my shock, I couldn't bring myself to take a photograph. To this day, I regret not being able to take a photo, because I'm not able to prove it to my friends and family. Besides, my cell phone was in the car. If I moved to get back into it, he might have heard me. I had nothing to arm myself, and I preferred my safety instead of showing any bravery, especially at a stupid time like this. I plucked up the courage to make my way to the car door, trying to make as little noise as I could. I managed to get in slowly and quietly without managing to disturb him. When I started the engine, he heard it. He became alert and saw my car's headlights. His eyes were sparkling in the lights, and his face was exactly like a goat's face. Then, I saw him on his hands and knees as he was crawling along the sides of the trees. Perhaps he was going back to his resting place after eating. I got home at about 10:30. I was very tired, but also pretty excited about what I saw. I was desperate to discuss it with my friend who was fond of making documentaries about such things. I decided that I will share the story with him, and we'll try and go back and plan to go there with some photographic gear and maybe some stuff for protection. It's just a thought of mine. But before I shared it with him, I plugged in my phone, made a light dinner, and turned on the TV to try and unwind. After having dinner, I had some tea and a 10-minute walk before going to bed. That was my routine, to walk to relax my mind and body from the day's hassle and tension. I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw. I was thinking about whether this thing had any type of family or if it is alone. didn't understand if he was harmful to human beings or not. Eventually, after going to bed, around 12 a.m., I got to sleep. I dreamt about what I saw. Although it was a very disturbed night's sleep, it was okay because the next day was Sunday, and I had the day off. Normally, I have a lie-in on a Sunday, but this morning I was too excited. After getting up and showering, I sat on the couch and called my friend to tell him about what I saw. He picked up the phone after it rang for a while. I'd clearly woken him up. I told him the whole story, and we planned to visit that place that night, fully prepared. He was super excited and didn't want to wait a day longer. We didn't want to do any of this on an empty stomach, so we met up for dinner first. After we finished dinner, we went back to the site where I had the encounter. We were there for a few hours, looking around, trying to find clues. We heard some dogs barking somewhere in the distance, and some different animal noises. They were breaking the silence of the night. Although I was a little apprehensive and nervous, I did feel a lot safer with my friend around me. He supposedly had a lot more experience with these things. After a while of searching and finding nothing, we set up his camera alongside the car. It had some self-detection object clicking mode. It was getting cold as it was winter, so we sat in the car to keep warm. Half an hour passed and I was starting to get bored, so I thought it might be an idea to get out and try and do another search for it. Just as I was about to get out, the camera activated. It caught something running at high speed. It was a dog. It was being chased by this Goatman. We remained frozen to the spot. The Goatman paused for a second and looked at us. Then he ran on after his prey. My friend was overjoyed by what he had finally seen. We decided to call it a night and went back to my place to review the footage. Sadly, the only thing we caught on camera was the dog. But that was the last time I ever saw this thing, even though since then I've made multiple journeys past this location. I do hope that one day he comes back, and I'm able to capture him on camera. Thank you for watching and/or listening to this video. Again, if you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button, and if you don't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and select the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future uploads. Also, please leave a comment on this video letting me know what you thought of it. Comments really help with the YouTube algorithm and will really help the channel to grow. If you have a story you would like me to narrate, please email it to me at stories@daredevil.com. I have recently passed 50,000 subscribers on this channel, so I'm halfway to my next major milestone. Thank you to everyone who is continuing to subscribe to this channel and contributing to its growth by liking videos and leaving comments. Once I get to 100,000 subscribers, my plan is to reward you all with an epic video with over 3 hours of original content. If that is the sort of thing you want to hear, please help keeping this channel to grow. If you want to support my channel even further, there are a number of ways you can do so. You can consider leaving me a tip for this video via my PayPal, link is included in the description. Check out my Teespring store and consider purchasing one of my shirt designs. Or head over to Audible, where there is a book, Punch by J.R. Park, that I narrated. I do get a small royalty if you decide to purchase that. Thanks again.